Would you get up for our worship team real quick as we kind of do a little bit of a, you guys could do better than that, my goodness. Oh, well, my name is Alex. I'm the lead pastor here. I usually have a table here, and it's kind of weird. If you're watching online, so good to have you with us. But if you're here in person, I want you to reference something before we dive in to our last message in our series on Therefore Go. We're going to have a conversation. Grab this card. Everybody grab this card. Everybody got the card in your hand? That includes you, Terry Peterson. I see you staring at me. All right, we did this. We have anybody know what next Sunday is? You know, this thing called Easter. And we did this a couple weeks ago for our last big day. We're having a big day next Sunday. We're believing for 100 people to be here in service next Sunday. Who's ready for that? You ready, believing? Yep. Okay. And our last big day, we ended up with 92 in service with us that day, I believe. Wasn't that? I think that was. And but this card, what did we do with this card? We had these a couple weeks ago. You have it again. You need to be today praying about who you're going to give this card, who you're going to invite to come with you. At our church, we always have room for one more person, and that person is going to be your friend, your neighbor, your loved one, right? Those who are far from Christ, those who don't have a church home, maybe they're new to the community. So you take this card and invite somebody to come with you next Sunday, join you for Easter. We're going to be starting a new series called A Future of Hope, and I don't know about you, but I feel like we in our community especially, who here could use some hope? Okay, so there's like a third of us that could use some hope. Man, I wish I had the life the rest of you had. It must be awesome to live a life of, I'm there. And so I think our country, if anything this last year has taught us, right? If anything the last year has taught us, it's taught us we need each other more than we realize, relationships more valuable than we ever gave it credit for, and we need more hope. Like, we need hope. And so many people walking around in fear and living in fear. The Bible tells us we don't live in fear. Right? We live in wisdom and power. And so invite somebody to come with you for Easter next Sunday, and it's going to be awesome. But I do want to recognize, especially we have a few guests with us. And if you guys have seen online, some of our teenagers for Anchor Youth are posting about this thing for next Saturday where you can get Easter eggs delivered right to your house. Anybody, if you haven't seen that online, you need to go to Holly's Facebook page. I know it's on Michelle's Facebook page, I believe. It's on a lot of the moms' Facebook pages. You can help us help our teenagers raise money for Speed the Light. And Pastor Dalton, I believe our youth group made a goal of $7,000. Is that accurate? And I would tell you, we've already given 1,000 of it to Speed the Light last month. And so that's something to celebrate, yes. And so the person who oversees all that is with us. He's actually speaking to our teenagers tonight. His name is Pastor Darren Stroud. He's over here. He's the one with the hair that's a lot higher than all of ours. And now the crazy cool story is that he's actually Brooke's youth pastor. And so for those of you Dalton's your youth pastor, this is the person for her. That's the one. And him and his wife, Marlene, have been good family friends of ours. I used to tear him up on the basketball floor, and then yesterday on the golf course. He wishes he could be like me. And I wish I had his hair. Well, I had to stop because I had a kid who got cold. Excuses, yes. But Darren, it's so good to have you. And if you have teenagers who aren't planning on being here tonight, they should be, because you're going to get a firsthand glimpse of why raising money for Speed the Light is so important. And if you guys look out your right window, look to this. There is, I believe it's a Honda, literally right here with a Speed the Light sticker that Speed the Light paid for the vehicle. That our missionary guests who are at my favorite campus on the planet, which is KU. Anybody KU fans around here? Yeah, we didn't do too well last week, but that's all right, and it's another day. And this is our Chi Alpha missionaries. Chi Alpha is a ministry to our secular college and university campuses. And this is something that's very near and dear to Brooke and I's heart. And as we were praying many, many months ago about this series on the importance of the passage in Matthew calling us to therefore go. We spoke 2 weeks ago. We shared with why it's important to not only hear God's voice, but actually listen. It's one thing to hear, just ask your spouse. If it's one thing to hear, it's another thing to actually listen. And we shared about how Samuel was hearing the voice of God, and he kept hearing Eli, thinking it was Eli. And it was and the courage it took for Eli to have confidence to know, man, no, go back to bed. And remember what we said, speak, for who is listening? Your servant. And so last week we talked about obeying, and I know we talk about that word obedience. But there's so many, I will tell you, in my journey towards Christ, I have found that obedience, and you can almost wrap up your entire faith into that one word. And we shared about how it was important to obey God's voice. And so what better way to have some missionaries who have done this to a place that all of us interact with. If you live in Lawrence and have not interacted or intersected with a college student, you need to get out more. Yes, I said it. I promise you, I said this last week. College students are not just an annoyance that makes driving across town longer. But it does, right? Come on. Between that and all the red lights on 23rd Street, we're all like, ugh. Right? But so Brooke and I were over this ministry for several years, and I said this when this couple took the role. KU is in better hands now than it ever has been, and I'm excited to have them join me. Would you guys give it up and give a welcome? Our first guest in our church, as far as a missionary, Zach and Hannah. We're going to play this by a little. We're all flexible. You good? We all flexible. Hannah's going to join us, but she may go back and forth a little bit because they do have a new little one, and as you know, little ones like their mothers. Why don't they like us?
He's clingy to mom. That's okay. Something about her.
I hate to break it to you. The older they get, it doesn't change too much. And so it's an honor to have you guys first and foremost. So excited you guys are with us. Lawrence is home, right?
It is, yes.
For how long? When did you guys move here?
I think it was officially to Lawrence it'd be 3 years in May. So, last 3 years.
That's right, because they moved to Lawrence just shortly after we launched, if I remember right.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody here who's better at calendars than I am. But it's an absolute pleasure to have you guys with us today. And so we want to really dive. I want you guys to just share with us. We're believing that this year is a year of miracles. That's kind of our heart and our dream for this year. God's put some big vision in front of us, and that this is the year of miracles. We have it on the programs. We've got it. We believe God. So we want to start because I know you guys getting here. You're a KU student, KU alumni.
I spent some time here. Yes.
A little bit of time.
I journeyed through here at one point in my college career.
And so walk us through that. Give us kind of to start. Give us, because so many people, I will say, very few understand the life of a university student. And a great way to, when you're talking about, and we'll get into your story, but just to kind of give them context of who God's called you to reach. Give us some context of what the life of a university student looks like. And you both feel free, interrupt each other. This is, our church is used to this. Just have fun. But share with us what the life of a college student looks like.
Yeah.
Different.
They were different. We had different experiences. Mine started, I never really had a passion for higher education. I'll say that. I played soccer my whole life. So college was just an extension of being able to play soccer. So I spent 2 years at JUCO, Garden City Community College. And after that, I had opportunities to go play other places. But I passed on those, and I decided I don't want to play soccer. I want to go to KU because I know KU. I've been a KU fan my entire life. I have friends there. And if I were to go play soccer again, basically I was like, man, I'm going to have to be on a new team. I'm going to have to restart this, trying to meet people and hang out. And here I knew people. So while I was here, I did what a lot of college students at KU do. And I didn't just start at KU. I partied a lot, because what else was I doing? I hung out on Mass Street a lot. Again, higher education was not my strength. I did college for the most part because soccer allowed me to do it. But here, it's not like I was trying to actively rebel or do anything crazy. It's just that's what everybody did, and that's what I did. So that's kind of what I did at KU for my year here. And then, long story short, at some point I watched a Lou Holtz video in a marketing class at KU, and Lou said something.
Everybody know who Lou Holtz is? We got a couple. Yeah.
He said something along the lines of "Don't settle yourself short." I left that class, and I said, you know what, Zach, you settled yourself short. You're here partying, and you're not doing a lot. So I called a coach that recruited me in Arkansas. And I said, hey, is there any chance you'll take me back in the fall? And he said, if you get here, there's a spot for you on the team. So at that point, I was like, okay, I've spent a year at KU just living life. I want to go play soccer again. So I moved to Arkansas with the only intention of playing soccer. I'd never really visited just for a recruiting trip, but I was like, I don't care what's going on. I have 2 years of eligibility. That's what I'm going to do. So that was my take on college. It was party and it was soccer, mixed very tightly together.
And if you were being led to Arkansas, I mean, the only way you'd do that is if God was in there somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't see it at the time, but that is absolutely the truth.
Hey, listen.
I'm from Arkansas, so.
Well, it's a good thing God brought you out of the darkness into the light. I mean, hey. No.
It's definitely less humid here.
Yeah. So, I believe we should have your picture up. Introduce your family to us.
Yes, well, this is Hannah, my wife.
Hi, Hannah.
And then, and then we have Elon, who's next to Hannah. He'll be 6 in May. Then we have Emerson. She turned 3 in November. And then we have Lyndon, he's a little baby in that picture. But he's almost 9 months. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, it is so vital. And one of the things and I'll kind of address if you're watching live or online or you're here with us. One of the reasons why you're our first guest missionaries that our church has ever had. And it was really important because as we talk about going out and therefore go, that's the series we've been in. I have been around the church my entire life, grew up a pastor's kid. And you guys as missionaries spent 10 years in your shoes, different circumstances, of course, but our kids were really not that far off. And, but one of the things I've seen that we as the church overall we've done a better job at sending than we are at going. And we talk in our church a lot about loving our community. We all call our food distributions Love Lord's Giveaway. I wore a shirt last week. Yeah. While we can easily give money and go do things and send missionaries all over the world, as we should, but if we forget about our neighbor, and if you're a Lawrence resident, if you call this home, the greatest mission field God has put before you is your neighbor. And what I mean by your neighbor is that could be your coworker, the person who lives next to you, your family member, which includes KU. And so as we're going and we're talking about this, I know the story because I was, we've known you guys for a while, but share with our church, how did you guys know, because God was calling you into this life of ministry? Because we get caught up so many times as Christians thinking that the only way I'm actually doing ministry is if I'm vocationally doing ministry, whereas, man, half the people in our church do more ministry than I do every single day of their week. In their jobs, whether they're nurses or mechanics or, whether they're sitting at Culver's making burgers and serving custard. We have a lot of people in our church who work at Culver's. And so how did you know God was calling you guys into this life of actual vocational style ministry?
Well, it was definitely not something that I actively sought out.
Was it during your parties that you were feeling?
I heard writing on the wall.
Yeah. No, it's definitely nothing I ever actively pursued. Like when I went to Arkansas, like I said, I went to play soccer, and it was along the lines in there. I heard about this Chi Alpha thing. I didn't hear about it. I met the campus pastor, and I started going to a small group, and I didn't know what campus ministry was. I grew up in church, but like I said, I wasn't actively involved. But I went to this small group, and it was with soccer players, and I just started seeing people open up, be real, live life together. And then I would go to this service, this Chi Alpha service, and I for the first time in my life, I looked around. I said, there was about 500 people there, students there, and I said, I saw college students, people my age, following after God, and actually, but it looked living life, and it looked differently than anything I'd ever experienced. I said, this room, there's something different. what they are doing is not what I experienced. And it intrigued me. So for me, that got me coming back. So throughout college, I was involved. Then after college, I went on this mission trip with Chi Alpha. I went to Zambia. I'd never been really out of the country or on a mission trip, but I went for a month. And then after that, I was like, man, that was incredible. God did so much in 1 month. What could he do with more? So after I graduated, I was like, well, I had a good time overseas. It was great. What if I went longer? So I said, well, I talked to my campus pastor. What are the options? And he laid out a couple things. I said, what's the longest option? He said, a year. So I said, okay, that sounds good to me. I'll go a year. Why? So I went overseas to Zambia for a year, 3 days after I graduated. It's not like I just woke up and said, hey, I want to go for a year, but it was these incremental steps by, hey, I'll go to small group. Hey, I'll go to Chi Alpha. Hey, I'll go on this Chi Alpha retreat. Hey, maybe I'll go on this mission trip. And then it was, hey, maybe I can go for a year. And it wasn't just this giant leap, but it was these incremental steps. So then after I got back from that, it was like, man, that was incredible. Lord, do you want me to go overseas? I'm not opposed to it. Or what are the options? And it was like, okay, hey, do this internship. Okay, I'll do this. Why? Because just another natural step of trying to follow, kind of just get closer to God is really what it was. It wasn't, again, ministry. It was God. Okay, I'll follow. And then after that, it was like, okay, do you want to be on staff with us at Central Arkansas? I was like, well, why wouldn't I be on staff? Why wouldn't we do this? Because it was just the next step. And then KU came about, and it was like, well, God, I guess is that the next step? And then it was just, and that's what it was. And it was just these incremental steps of, all right, Lord, if that's you, I'll take a step. And that's kind of how we got to vocational ministry. Again, it wasn't when I was kicking a ball around saying, I want to serve the Lord and do ministry. It was the farthest thing from that. He's like, hey, just one more step towards me. And he just kind of ran with it.
I love that, because one of the things we're teaching as a part of our culture is that everybody has a next step. Doesn't matter where you're at. And so many people think obeying God tends to be these like cliff diving experiences. And what I have seen, and maybe you guys could give some light to this, is I've seen a lot of people who try to take those cliff dives. They end up somewhere they didn't expect, and so when their expectations that they had aren't met, they feel like God wasn't in it. But yet what God was really trying to get you to do was just take a small step. And what happens is when you take a series of small steps, as simply as, and we'll get to our next steps for today, as simply as like reading scripture. Even, we met with a young lady in our church this week talking about, and she was going to the point of feeling like, okay, if I'm not like this, then, if I'm not taking the faith steps of this person, I'm not there yet. Well, it's like, you're not supposed to be there yet. And so taking those incremental steps, taking those small steps of recognizing God every day is so huge, because God's going to speak. I think if you posture your heart to hear God's voice, guess what you're going to hear? You hear God's voice, right? And so what I love about what Zach just said was, they didn't just show up in Lawrence one day because they just happened to move here and accidentally ended up in Chi Alpha. I mean, God had a process to walk them through, and that process where God wants to get you includes you taking small steps of obedience, whether or not they're comfortable. And that's where I think a lot of Christians really struggle is, well, every step of obedience should be comfortable. Usually they're not comfortable. And the farther you get into that journey, the more uncomfortable they get. But the more comfortable you get in trusting that you've heard God's voice. But I want to hear, give us your story. How did you, because I know you're from Arkansas.
Yeah, when did you get involved in all that story I just told?
I don't know. Well, about when you left.
Yeah,
I met you 3 months before you left for a year to Africa. And I was like, sweet, finally found a solid dude, and then he leaves. I was like, so we did the long distance thing for a while, but anyway. So I grew up at church, but I was the family that sat in church, was there every Sunday, but then we were the first to leave. We were like the last to come, the first to leave. I went to the same church for 13 years and knew a couple of the families there. And so it was easy to do that. And I think sometimes we forget how easy that is to just come in, kind of be, and then leave. And so I love to see a church that won't let you do that. And so where they kind of like, hey, who are you? What are you doing? Like, let's hang out. And for me, that was Chi Alpha. So I went to school for academics.
Very different.
And purely academics, like
Are you saying athletes don't go to school for academics?
sometimes
This
they
one
do.
did not. I'll just say, I
Sometimes they
can't
do.
speak for everybody.
My mind is blown.
I can't speak for everybody.
Some of them do, I think. But so I came to school for academics and tried to still treat campus ministry with that same mentality that I grew up in. It's all I really knew. And Chi Alpha wouldn't let me. And they brought me in, and they were family, and they said, hey, come to this small group, come to have lunch with me. And I was like, why are you inviting me to lunch? Like, this is so odd. And they just continued to disciple me through that, and I got more involved. And then I have a tendency to want to fully understand a subject. And so whenever I really got into following Jesus, I was eating up the word. And to the point where it would almost give me anxiety, because I said, I've never read the Gospels before. Yes, I grew up in church. I did not know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was the same story from different perspectives. But I grew up in church my whole life. And I only knew like what the felt board had told me. You know, if any of you remember the felt board with the Sunday school, that's all I knew, and I didn't have a lot of context. And so I was getting involved in just basically like family when it came to following Jesus, and I was just eating it up, and I just blew through the Gospels, and I was going through, and then I went on a mission trip like Zach did, at different times though, and I started to get overwhelmed because I was like, how can I know all this? Kind of the story you were saying of well, that person's down this road and they know that. And I'm like, I'm not even close. And I felt the need to sprint so I could catch up. And people always had to tell me, like, slow down, like one step at a time. And that eased a lot of my anxiety to like feel like I was so behind, because I was 23, 24 and just now reading some things. And when you're around 18-year-olds who are farther ahead than you, it's a little intimidating. And so I went through that. God actually spoke to me through that Samuel verse. One time I was just in my duplex and was reading through it, and I was just reading it out loud, and Eli tells Samuel, like, go back and say, God, I'm listening, and I'm your servant, or your servant is listening. And so then I was like, okay, I guess I'll like just say that out loud, because I'm so new to all of this. I was like, I don't know what to do. And so I said, all right, God, I'm listening, and I'm your servant. And I just heard in my heart, like, you're my servant? And I said, yes. And he said, then serve. And that was it. Like, that was my call. And so it was kind of like what Zach said, it was incremental steps of obedience that was, all right, well, how can I serve? Well, be more plugged into Chi Alpha, look for areas to like help out. And then I was invited onto a leadership team. All right, well, just kill it with finding people for your small group and just look for ways to serve. Not to be in the front and be seen, but just to be that person that you see when you have I have a great example with that. There's this outdoor wedding, and it had just rained right before the wedding. And you have one of the groomsmen who's taken his shirt off, and he's wiping down all the chairs.
This is a true story, by the way.
It's a true story. He's a good friend of ours. And he is an incredible example of servant leadership. And I remember seeing that and be like, wow. Like, just to take, like, you're at a wedding, and, like, you're trying to look nice, and he just takes off his button up and just starts wiping down the chairs for all the guests. And for me, I was called separately from Zach. We were kind of, our paths crossed right in the middle of it, and then he left for the year in Zambia, and that's when God really started to just run with me and just kept opening things in my heart and like showing me things, and just a lot of redemption in my life. And so when he came back, we basically had to start over, because that's weird. Like,
it was strange. We dated for 3 months. I was gone for a year, and I was like, I saw her again. I was like, do I give you a hug? I don't know what to do. I've been in the bush in Zambia. Interaction is difficult.
He's like, you went to a cell phone store to because he had to come back and get a new phone, and he's overwhelmed with the lights and all the options. He's like, oh my gosh, I have to leave, because it's just culture shock, And so we basically had to start over, but then we decided, hey, we're going to do the internship, and we were dating when we did the internship together, got engaged, and we were married and went on staff, so pretty cool.
That's awesome. So if you can see, and for those of you who've been around for the little bits of Chi Alpha's DNA that are intertwined into the culture of our church, we've talked since the beginning. If you're here, it's expected you serve. If you don't serve, you're going to keep getting talked to. You should serve. That's to the point that we've truthfully ran people off because they get mad. I just want to come attend church.
Yeah.
That's not how church works. That may be how some churches work. That's not how our church works. And so, what I love about the passage where Eli is telling Samuel is just go lay down. Go lay down. What God really wrapped my eyes around during this series is how easily Eli could have manipulated the entire situation to his advantage, and could have said, "Oh, it is me, and I need you to do this for me." And he was able to take the posture of going, "No, that is God. Go lay down and speak and listen." And so when we really have to trust that we've heard God's voice. I know when Brooke and I started feeling like God was leading us out of campus ministry into starting a church, we had no idea what that looked like. It had been years. Truthfully, our biggest fear, I would say, in starting a church was the fact we were going to be in the same church for more than 2 weeks in a row. I mean, it had been years. You know that lifestyle. And it had been years since we had, and now we can't imagine anything different. And so the idea of serving and doing life with people, we don't have members at our church. We don't have members. We have anybody who wants to be a member, we call them partners. And we use this analogy a lot, is a member looks at a piece of trash on the ground and says, oh, I pay somebody to throw that away. A partner says, I'm invested here, I pick up the piece of trash and throw it away. And there's so many different cultures that God tries to create, and it all starts with obedience. And so what I love about, realizing that God's called us to go, and because I know so much of it, your guys' story and how this was, Lawrence was not even on your radar, and just how God, and I remember sitting in the meeting with you guys, and one of the pastors in the room was affirming to both, the fact that God was calling you to come and Brooke and I to go was the affirmation of all of us hearing God's voice at the same time. And so how did you know, you heard God's voice? How did you know God was leading you? What in your mind was okay, I know this step is right?
I like to, she has something.
I'm sure
I'll be quiet.
Okay. No, I think it's hard because I think a lot of times we expect this voice to tell us exactly what to do, for big decisions. And I remember being in our home in Arkansas and staring out the window and being like, God, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I have no problem doing it. If you tell me, I'll do it. And I was just sitting there because the question was, do we stay or do we go? Do we stay in Arkansas because we were in an established role. We both had significant responsibilities and a lot of disciples. And so it wasn't like we were supposed to be looking for the next place.
Ministry was booming.
We had there's 600 students. I was over 25 girls, and ministry life was full. Yeah. And so when this came up, I was like, man, there's a need, and basically what they were describing that they wanted for KU described us. And so we were trying to just weigh that. And I remember staring out the window and being like, God, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'm not upset either way. I'd be happy to stay. I'd be happy to go. And I just heard him say, I'm not that kind of dad. And so I think when it comes to your kids, you want them to make their own decisions. To a certain point, you're guiding those decisions and you're pouring wisdom into it, and you're saying okay, maybe not that road, but look over here. But if your kid came up to you every time and was like, Mom, what should I have for lunch? And I'm like, well, what do you want for lunch? No, if you just tell me what I'll have for lunch, I'll do it. I'll go get it and I'll eat it. I'm like, that's not fun. Like, that's not a relationship. And so God literally just said, like, I'm not that dad. And I just felt that it was our decision to do it. And it came down to, for me, will this bring me closer to God? And so it's like, yeah, I can stay here in this ministry. I'm doing well and like have a lot of fruit, and it could bring me closer to God, but I have to kind of press in a little bit harder to make sure that I'm being challenged. But I know that if we were to move and basically start over, that would bring me closer to God. And I think that for me, that was my determining factor of like, will this bring me closer to God? Mm-hmm.
And I think that is incredible wisdom, because one of the things as a pastor I've watched people walk through is they feel like they heard God speak, and then they get frustrated when there's options on the end for them to choose. And they just are like, okay, God, we wish faith was black and white. We get frustrated because really faith is a lot more gray than we want to give it credence to. And so when you obey God and you get to the end of that road and you realize I have option A or option B, and both are going to be fruitful for your life. Yeah. And God's sitting here going, what have I prepared you to do? What step have I prepared you to take? Because if you take the wrong one, and this was, if you guys aren't taking notes, you guys should, I'm telling you. Like, you getting closer to God is the goal. Yes. Like, because as you get closer to God, and Brooke and I've been sharing this, is then you start bringing people along with you. And so if you're growing in your faith and you're not bringing anybody along in that journey, you're missing a part of your growth. Because what I've found is the more everybody else around me grows, the more I grow. And so the idea of taking steps of obedience is my growth, but then it affects other people's growth. And so this idea of hearing God's voice and then obeying, we shared the story of Peter last week and how Jesus had just fed the 5,000 with a few fish and a few loaves, right? And he sends him out onto the water. Jesus goes up to the mountain to pray. Remember we talked about this last week, everybody? And then they can't even recognize the presence of Jesus, but they thought it was a ghost. And we kind of briefly go over this. And Peter, in bold faith, goes, Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come. And he couldn't recognize the presence of Jesus, but he recognized the voice of Jesus. And so he jumps out of the boat, right? This is my absolute favorite story in all of Scripture. Jumps out of the boat, and I'm like, I wish I was one of the disciples. Like, truthfully, that would, like, there's very few times in Scripture I'm kind of like, that'd be fun. No, I wouldn't want to be the ant on a wall. I'd want to sit here and go, dude, you're psycho. Like, that's everybody. It's like you're jumping out in the middle of a storm, and immediately gets caught up by chaos. And one of the things that I remember back in campus ministry is we'd have high school seniors who had just graduated. And they'd walk onto campus and they'd make statements like, man, I'm going to change this campus. Like, and I'm sure you guys have never heard that, and not that there's anything wrong with the attitude, but every single one that ever made that statement to me ended up walking away from their faith within the first year. So when you're talking about the chaos and the storms of life interfering with our obedience, how are you seeing that affect? I mean, we've got a lot of teenagers we've got a lot of teenagers in our church, and God has been doing some amazing things in our teenagers' lives. And I know one of Pastor Dalton's hearts is because he'll be the first to say he grew up in a church, came onto campus, and it totally surprised him. Is how do our teenagers prepare for the chaos that's going to happen and the storms that'll rage after they graduate high school, walking onto a campus?
Yeah, it's challenging and it's different because obviously, like, it's really for the first time in your life, you have choice, you have freedom, and now you get to walk it out and you get to make your own decisions. So it's challenging. I think. Man, Hannah, if you got anything, I'm an internal processor for this one. Man, I think for students, I think the sooner they can find, everybody's looking for the same thing. Everybody wants purpose and community. I mean, that's you walk on the college campus, that's what people want. They want purpose.
Oh, I think that goes a lot. Oh, yeah. I would have said that was a college student, now I became a pastor. I think that's everybody.
No, absolutely,
everybody. Yeah. Whether they believe it or not, or whether they've lied to themselves and said, I don't want to know my purpose, and I really don't want relationship. Inside, that's just them masking that they don't know their purpose, and they feel like they have no relationships. But that's a message series for another year.
That's a lot of, yeah. No, that is everybody's they step on campus, they want it, they're 18, 19, 20, they want to make a difference. They want to leave an impact. And I think people get plugged into the things that they think they can invest themselves into and have the biggest impact. So I think for students, it's one, that foundation, what you're coming in with is like, it will be tested. I think a lot of stuff comes to the surface. Like, the sooner people get plugged into whatever community they get, and I think what we try to, we just want people to get plugged in, get involved, and that way they can start, serving. I think that's giving them something to do, giving them real purpose. We say, we want to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples, because there is no greater purpose or call than to make a disciple. I think when students do that, when they've felt being impacted by somebody, like, oh man, this person has changed my life because they invested this into me. I think there is something like, I have found how I can invest myself. And that's, you put people in real places of responsibility, and trusting them with another person is a scary thing. Because I feel like sometimes, I could tell this student more than this student who's pretty fresh. But to allow this guy who's walking into ministry, or, hey, I want you to take the time with this person, that's real responsibility. There's real purpose, and there's real consequences as well. It's not.
You may have to put out fires.
Yes, fires are real. But we've seen whenever people have real responsibility and real purpose, then I think the Lord's full of grace.
Seems less chaotic.
Yeah, it does seem less chaotic, and I think Lord has grace with us. If we're striving for the right things, He's like, He can work in spite of us. Hopefully He doesn't have to work in spite of us, but He can work through us, and He can. There's a lot of grace, I think, for it. But I think having people find real purpose, investing time into other people, I think that's a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, I think going from graduating high school to just what do you do day one, my suggestion, because I went from no community to the wrong community to no community, and then finally the right community, but is what everybody else is doing, which is seeking community, but doing it with a good perspective, like a perspective through Jesus. To say, yes, Greek life offers community, for sure. And I think that's the enticing and attractive thing of Greek life, because they offer what you are desiring.
Yep.
At the same time, there's also campus ministries that will offer that. And so there's a little bit of wisdom on which one you may choose when you get there. My advice, or rather just what I would say to a new graduate coming in, is that it's not really that chaotic. It's going to feel chaotic, and it's going to feel scary, and it's going to feel that, but only to the extent that you allow it to. I think if anybody in this room who has lived life, you realize that life's a lot of choices, and that it's really not as dramatic as as some people would think it is.
Maybe you're like me, and you just had the mental picture of certain people who make choices more dramatized than it should be. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe, again, if I'm the only one, husbands, you know what I'm talking about.
I think for me, there was this poll the
Brooke's
other
in the
day.
back, so I'm good. She's not going to throw anything at me.
Okay. She'll watch it later. No, there's this poll that said, if you could give some advice to some young college students, what's something that you wish you had known when you were their age? And mine was, I wish someone had told me that your choices when it comes to what your job's going to be, what you're going to study, and all of that, what you're going to do in the next 10 years aren't really that important as it is to your eternal choices. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds super holy or Jesus-y or whatever, but really when it comes down to it, if we have the perspective of how does God want to further His kingdom through my life, then you just approach life differently. We even tell our students that they say, well, I have this test or I have this club I'm a part of or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it's always going to be something. And especially as you get older, if you decide to have a family, like whatever, it's going to be more. It's always going to be more that you're going to have to choose. So which mandatory thing are you going to give up? Because everything's mandatory. Like, people always like to throw that out. And God's kingdom is eternal and it's forever, and like we want to make those choices that actually matter, because on a timeline, our life is such a tiny part compared to God's timeline. And so what does God want me to do with it? And I want it to be decisions that last the whole timeline, not just my little section.
And I think that is incredible insight, because I don't know about you, but I'm not getting any more time. We talk about that all the time, right? We say a lot of time. And so it's not just college students who struggle with that. And we talked last week that every time I feel like I've heard God's voice and I didn't, I'm saying no to a time where I probably did hear God's voice. And sometimes we mask God's voice as our preference. And we tend to walk forward and we say, okay, God, I'm going to go here. I'm going to do this just because it's easy and it's convenient. And God's not going to call us out of convenience. God's going to call us out of humility. He's going to call us out of our heart being postured. That the dangerous statement that every Christian should make every day is, God, use me today.
Yes.
Speak, for your servant is listening. And, I know you guys have a huge passion for students. And I know you have as equal of passion for world missions and going overseas, and because that's kind of how you got here. And so share with our church why campus ministry is so vital, why it's important, why is reaching the 30,000 students at KU, why is it so important for the church as a whole, not just you as a couple, but for the church as a whole, because maybe you don't. I'll give you some stats, that there are over 3,000 secular university and college campuses in America. And the last I saw, there was only 290-ish Chi Alpha groups. Yeah. And so the reach is enormous. The largest mission field in the world is our university and college campuses. And I will tell you that because I lived it. But why is it so important for our culture? Because obviously you're speaking to a lot of adults who see the student, and you live with it and you see it, and a lot of times you only get the annoyance of it, but you don't see the effect it has on our culture. Yeah. Why is campus ministry so important?
I think we think it's the most strategic mission field in the world. It really is. I think you have people coming from all over the world coming to the campus. You get every nationality coming to campuses around, all over the country. And really, this is the future. I think the students are the future of the church. You look at the campus, you're like, in a couple years, these people will be filling pews or not. It is the future. And it's an incredibly vital time. Like I said, people are finally making choices on their own. And being able to invest in people at that time when they're taking, making critical choices that will really affect eternity on this timeline. It's like 60 years or eternity. And people are making these decisions that are just eternal, that have eternal consequences. And I think even for me, seeing how much my life was impacted by it, it was like, I wasn't looking for it. Growing up, I said, no chance I would ever want to do anything like this. To see how God can use somebody has no desire for anything of the Lord, and really just change a life. I was like, man, the impact that it's made on me. There are so many students that walk on campus that aren't looking, that aren't hungry, but God just wants a chance with them. And for me, it was like, there's 30,000 at KU. I was one of them. The impact goes to the end of the earth. It really does. I I think last week, was it last week? I helped move a buddy I drove up to Boston 2 weeks ago. It was a long trip. Drove up to Boston, and he was roommates with me in college. He was a soccer player. His life was transformed, and now he's going to go plant Chi-Alpha at Harvard in the fall. And like he's taking a team of 8 with him to Harvard. And it just, when people are willing to say, all right, Lord, what do you want to do? It's like, okay, I'll take you to Harvard. It's like taking kids from Oklahoma, Texas, a couple of hicks from Arkansas. I can say that they are country kids, and they're going to go pioneer on Harvard University. That's not who the world would look at and say, let's use those guys. But the Lord is moving in people's lives on campus. People are looking for purpose, and when they pair purpose with eternal value, like it's just, and the world can be changed. And I think, that the campus is ripe with people looking for that.
Yeah, you have people who are making critical decisions, and they're in a point in their life where they can launch a little bit easier to different categories. And the thing is, my perspective is like, I just see lots of people who could potentially be missionaries. And because they're the next leaders, they're the next healthcare workers, they're the next store clerks, like small business, they're corporation workers, like they're going to be everywhere. And so you can live, like you guys have been talking about, like missional no matter where you are. And so I just see it as a garden for missionaries. And you're going into the marketplace, which is like the workforce or the home or whatever, and then you're going all over the world vocationally. And you see it start in Texas or Arkansas and go all the way to Boston. And we've got people in Vietnam and Mozambique and
Lebanon,
Lebanon, and like just
you
name it, they're there. But it's just to see it as a garden, to say like, hey, these are God's children, and he wants to grow them in a way where they are missional no matter where they go. And the campus is such a right place for that, because they all come to you.
Yep.
It can be challenging in the workforce, but you can do it in the workforce as well. Like my degree's in math and computers, whatever, it's management information systems. So like basically I was going to go work for a corporation and help them solve problems. And so probably like a cubicle or something like that. But to me, that's just so, I can't even think about that now because my life is just so different. But just to be able to be in that situation, and I kind of thought, well, no one's really ever going to reach out to me, or no one's going to say, hey, you want to come to my small group? And I feel like with this next church generation, like that's going to change. That you're going to have people in cubicles or at home offices or in a business, and there's going to be people, no matter their age or like where they're at, they're going to say, hey, do you want to come to my small group? And now I believe the marketplace is going to be ripe to be a launching pad for more missionaries. And I think it's because the church is now feeling the call to be active and to not leave it at college, because sometimes we see students who really got it in college and in the campus ministry, and they get to work and they don't know how to do it. And I'm like, you just do the same thing. It's a little more challenging, and it's different in all different ages, but I think the marketplace is ripe as well in that same aspect.
Absolutely. And we believe wholeheartly that our community should be wrapping our campus with prayer first and foremost, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with you guys and reaching. There's 76,000 people in our community that are not in church today, and we talk all the time about we're joining in the fight for the 76,000, and so what you do matters to us. Obviously, you guys know how Brooke and I feel because it's something that we spent 10 years of our life investing in. But we are so grateful we get to stand shoulder to shoulder, and I know God's got big things for you guys. God's got big things for the campus. If you were to impart some wisdom into our church, what is it what's one lasting piece of wisdom you could leave on our hearts today?
Man, 2 Timothy 2:2, I think, is wisdom. It says, what you've heard in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will be faithful to teach others. And really, it's the same on the campus. It's the same in the marketplace. It's the same wherever you go. It's a picture of generational discipleship. You have Paul, who wrote a whole lot of the Bible. He's speaking to his young follower, Timothy. And we get this picture of like four generations. It's 4 generations. It's Paul speaking to Timothy. He says, find faithful men who will teach others. And that is what church is. That is what discipleship is. It's when you will invest into one who will go invest into others, who will go invest into others. And like, that's what doing life together is. Sometimes we're like, how do I meet people? How do I disciple? It's you live life to get with people. You don't do life alone. It's nothing new, but looking at the impact that it actually has if we take this thing on. Like, there's been a plan that's been laid out long before any of us were here. It's the same as it was 2,000 years ago. It's make disciples. Go find faithful men who will teach others. And that's that's all we really try to do. Again, it doesn't matter where you're at. That's all we're trying to do. There's already a game plan. We don't need a new way to reach people or a new way to do things. It's like, just stick to the old way. Jesus did it. Paul explained it. Like, the plan's already there. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We try to do. I think even us at times we try to do that too often. Let me reinvent something. And it's like, no, it's actually quite simple. Live life together.
I think right now, so we're trying to buy a house. And if any of you know the current real estate situation, there's like nothing, no inventory. And when something comes on, like 20 people hop onto it. So especially in our price range is like pretty average. So everybody's like on it. And we were getting kind of stressed out about it. We're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Like we feel like God has a house for us, but at the same time, it looks pretty dismal. Like, because like there was one house that was in our budget, but then the people they went with, they bid $20,000 over asking price, and I'm like, we can't do that, And so it's like,
anybody ever here struggle with that? Like trying to find. I know we have several families trying to find rental, like find a new rental property. People buying.
Yes, it's like it's just really awful right now, and so whatever. But we have just the sweetest realtor, and one day Zach was like, we have no reason to worry. Like, God can do whatever He wants. If He wants us to be in a rental house next year for a year, then we'll do that. If He wants to get us a house, He'll do it, because He can do whatever He wants. Yep. And then he said, and I feel like He wants to show something big to our realtor. And so even looking for the next invite, like the next person to connect with, we walk around and just look at houses all the time with her. And so it's just like, okay, well, where our spiritual eyes are always open. Mm-hmm. What does God want to minister to this person? How does He want to serve her? How does He want to show her His glory? And so we've just been praying, like, it's not about us, but to say, like, God, if you want to do something like so cool, obviously we would benefit from that, but it's not about that. Like, it's about like her seeing something incredible, and that He would get all of the glory from that, and like that's what we're praying. So if you want to pray for that as well, that'd be great.
Definitely. And I think that's a great way to bring the plane in for a landing on this entire series, where it's going to hit in our front yard, is that your preferences, you don't get to choose how God shows you favor. Yeah. You don't get to choose how God speaks to you. I don't get to sit. I don't lay at home and go, well, God, I really need to speak a message this Sunday, and I want to do it on this, and so give me a message to speak on this. That's not how it works. When you take the heart of what Eli told Samuel, which is you lay in bed and you say, speak, for your servant is listening, that means we have to shut up and listen. Yeah. And too many times we only listen when God's speaking something we want to hear. Mm-hmm. And way too many followers of Jesus aren't really followers of Jesus because they're trying to let the world give them what they want to hear, and they're trying to make God say the same thing. And it doesn't work like that. If we really want to impact culture, if we want to have a culture-defining church, or if we want to have a culture-altering church or a culture-altering ministry, because I know one of the things that you guys and Brooke and I were both synonymous with, we wanted students to graduate from KU and to walk into a church and be assets. Mm-hmm. Yes. Not to be the ones that the pastors have to sit back and go, I wonder where they've been for the last 6 weeks. Or, no, we wanted people to sit in and be like, tell me where I can serve. I may not enjoy it, but I'm going to do it. Yeah. Because the heart of a servant says it doesn't matter the task, because the end goal, which is people finding Jesus, it doesn't matter whether Summer needs help in kids or Pastor Luke needs help in tech. If I have the ability, God's already called me to do it. But so many of us take the posture of, well, God, I want you to call me in this. And it's got to look like this. And then we wonder, why is God not speaking? He is. You're just not listening. And God's going to speak. God's going to call. The question is, will we listen? Will we obey? And so we are staying shoulder to shoulder with you guys, and we're so excited to keep hearing the stories. I will tell you, it is, and it's like all the good feely things is our church has been praying, and I want to celebrate our church today. And I hope you're okay if we kind of get you're part of our family today, right? And you will be forever, for as long as God keeps you where you're at. Is they're a missionary. And God's called you to be a missionary. It's not just them. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that they live a life that's very different than how you and even I live is they're required on people living in faith and giving to help them buy a house. Who here owns your house? There's about a third of us, right? Okay. That's a big deal. And God's blessed them with the partners to be able to help make that happen. And that's also a sign, I remember for Brooke and I, that was a sign of our obedience that God, we're staying planted. Because it's easy to, when you're in a rental house, it's really easy to move place to place. God, we're being Moses, and we're planting our staff in the ground. But they are dependent upon people giving. And our church, and one of the miracles that God is already doing in our church, I would tell you, our church has increased what God gives on a month, what God is blessing through you by, I believe, is it, and Darren, tell me if I'm wrong, it's almost double in the last 2 months what we saw. We are up almost 50% over year to date this year over last year. If I'm not, am I accurate? Wow. Come on. Wow. No, like you guys understand, that's huge. You should be celebrating. You're allowing God to do something in you. And God's going to do something through you. And so it's a pleasure. We as a church want to financially support what you're doing on campus every month, and that's going to start next month. And we want to be a partner with you, both in prayer, but also in actual financial blessing. And we'll be praying. Can we all commit to pray that God will provide them a house? Because that's, we know. I heard our realtors told us just the other day there's 36 houses on the market right now. It's almost got me tempted to put my house on the market and throw some astronomical number. Terry's like, yeah, I'm in.
You won't find another one to live in.
And I'll live in the office back here, I guess. And my kids, Brooke may have, but she's outside, so she's good. No, been there. And she's like, so we want to pray a prayer of blessing over you, church family. If you'll stand with me this morning and just raise your right arm towards them. And Lord, we are so grateful for your partners in ministry, God, for people who are doing something.